Let's talk supply chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Supply Chain. So let's start with a question. Today's guest, they help customers to automate, validate, and secure supplier data, helping to avoid fraud and cyber attacks. But according to a recent report, what percentage of organizations had two or more identity-related breaches in the past year? Cybersecurity is a rapidly growing concern, so I assume it will be a pretty high percentage. But what do you think? Let me know your guesses over on social and keep listening because I'll let you know at the end of the show. So today we have the leading software brand, and that is Relish. So Relish apps strategically extend enterprise applications to maximize investment with an understanding of enterprise software gaps and challenges. Relish is obsessed with building a scalable solution to remedy them, to simplify the complex and bridge those gaps. And today we have two guests for you, not one, but we've got two. Jeremy Reeves, Senior VP of Product at Relish, is passionate about identifying and solving problems in supply chain. And he's joined by our returning guest, Matt Montgomery, Senior Director of Product Marketing at SAP and a global leader in procure-to-pay management. So today, Jeremy and Matt will be talking about how technology can automate supplier data validation and mitigate risk. We'll be diving into what our supplier data endgame should be and how we get there, the role of technology and AI in the future of this space, allowing suppliers to be active participants in the conversations around supplier risk, and exactly how SAP and Relish are successfully automating supplier data validation. So, welcome back, Matt, and welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Hi, good to see you on in person.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you both here. Now, we've had two great shows with Relish so far. I've enjoyed those. If you've missed any of those, go and check them out. You can find them on letstalksupplychain.com. But I'm looking forward to the two of you sort of rounding out this series for us. Because in the last show, we talked about the challenges of supplier data, and today is all about solutions. So there's going to be a lot to learn today. I would highly recommend you get out your paper, your pen, your electronic notepad, because you're going to be taking lots of notes listening to the episode today. So let's start with some introductions. Jeremy, we're going to start with you. Let us know who you are and what you do at Relish.
Yeah, so I lead our product team here at Relish, and prior to Relish, I worked with Matt at SAP Ariba,
Okay.
and I was there for 23 plus years in product roles there, and basically been living and breathing the procurement space for since college. So it's been a really long time, and if you talk to me at all, you'll know I'm super passionate about this subject and glad to be here today talking about
Yeah, well, and I can kind of see it, to be honest with you. You're really passionate about procurement. You've been in procurement a long time. I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes throughout the history of procurement, and maybe we'll get into it. Maybe we won't. If anybody wants to reach out, I'm sure they can talk to you about your history, and all the changes you've seen on LinkedIn. So, Matt, welcome back. Can you remind us who you are and what you do over at SAP?
Yeah, and as Jeremy just said, the 20 plus years, today was my daughter's first day of high school. So like that 20 years of procurement kind of hits a little hard here. But yeah, product marketing manager, I'm responsible and specialize in supplier management and risk. I mean, long time in procurement, ran global procurement operations in my past and did a lot of these programs on as a user. And now, I spent time in with SAP Ariba now for, I guess, 8 years. In pre-sales and various roles, but again, specializing in supplier management and risk now for product marketing.
So, as I mentioned in our last episode together, we talked about supplier data, specifically the challenges, the risks, the complexities involved. So, if anyone listening missed that, press pause on this episode, go back and listen to episode 416, and then come back to us. But just to set the scene for our discussion today, can you give us a brief reminder? Maybe an overview of the landscape of supplier data and the challenges of validation. Matt?
Yeah, I think when we talk about supplier data, like why do we even load it? And so there's a lot of solutions out there that will think about, okay, somebody's going to go fill out some data about the company name, the address, and try to get some information because you need that information, whether it's for to pay an invoice or to load them in to go through an approval process. But the supplier data comes first with all of this. And so what becomes complex, and it's that because that sounds really simple. What becomes complex is as you add in industry regulations, as you add in different commodities, as you add in different regions of the world with all of the regulations around them, and you look at the way that you're transacting with that vendor, there might be a location that you're leveraging in one state and you have to pay taxes and understand that based on where you're located. It gets more complex with different countries. And then you also have different corporate strategies that you're going to go after around sustainability, including human rights, green initiatives, whatever those are, diversity initiatives. And so there's much more of that supplier information that becomes a driver for all of the other decisions that you're going to make. And we've talked about where supplier management almost needs to be thought of as just the foundation for everything. Talk about it in the same way that you think about reporting or dashboards. It's just an expectation of knowledge that you need to have in every decision that you're making. So as we look at solutions and we talk about supplier data, we can't just talk about, well, company name and address. We have to think about what do you need to know to make that choice to use that supplier to make a better decision to,
Mm-hmm.
streamline the process and get it there. And, every time you're talking and engaging with another third party, it just slows down. It takes time. So how do you collaborate and drive a lot of efficiency there so that you could really spend more time on the good decisions that you need to make versus just data collection, which is really more of an administrative type task.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned regulations. I mean, now we're stopping shipments at the border and sending them back. If
Yes.
there's anything within that, not only the first tier supplier relationship, but even going deeper than that, and if there's any forced labor and things like that, that everybody needs to keep on top of. So there's a lot of risk, right? There's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of risks, and there's a lot of things that everybody needs to keep on top of to make sure that their
Correct.
flow of goods and their capital keeps moving, right? Because every time that shipment or that product or the raw material is down, that's capital on the table that nobody wants to lose out on.
Absolutely, and I think you've nailed that. And we're watching governments step in more than they have in the past. As you
Mhm.
were saying, the regulations. I mean, there's always going to be something completely random like the Suez Canal situation that's going to be there, and I'm not sure supplier data would have fixed that. Although you can leverage supplier data to understand what the impact is.
Right.
But as we look at like the DORA Act, which is all about IT and cyber and being able to understand to making sure that your suppliers have a certain level of capability and maturity so that you are less at risk and requiring that so that we can avoid these
Hmm.
outages due to hackers and whatnot. I mean, we're just seeing more and more of that importance and that so that the management of that supplier data, whether it's certifications or maturity levels, is gone well beyond just name and address so I can pay somebody and pay the taxes.
Right, right. And even that becomes complicated because even payments of suppliers, if they change their banks, there's fraud there and all sorts
Right.
of cybersecurity challenges around
Right.
that. But we're not
Right.
going to get into that because last time we promised that today's show would be all about solutions. So, what is the outcome we should be looking for? I mean, we know the challenges. So, if we apply the right solutions, what's kind of the end game? What should our supplier data look like? And what should it do for our businesses? Jeremy, I'll have you answer it first, then we'll go to Matt.
Yeah, no, I mean, first, speed and efficiency is really what the name of the game is, especially as you're trying to apply this technology, right? So you want to onboard those suppliers as quickly as possible so that you can um, pay them and get the goods and services that you want, right? And so
Mhm.
this is the challenge that's facing supplier managers today is how do I do that quickly and efficiently? And then at the same time, how do I make sure that that data is valid and it doesn't have any problems with it and can flow without throughout the process? And I have all the data that I need. You might need different data, whether you're doing the initial onboarding versus whether you're going to be paying a
Mhm.
supplier. So I think you're going to need these types of solutions that do that quickly and efficiently and seamlessly. This is one of the challenges that you're facing today is you have 30 different providers of this information globally, right? So how do you integrate all these different providers into a single solution? And it becomes a challenge because now you're having to manually go get it because these integrations are not built. So I think that's where, Relish, what we're doing is really key in this area because we are going and getting that data and integrating all those different providers into one place. And so that you don't even know that we're there.
Huh, I love that. You don't even know that we're there. I mean, who doesn't want that? Matt, what would you add to that about
Yeah,
solutions?
yeah, and I think so. We've watched this evolution, and when you look at what Relish is doing, is really important in that maturity curve. Because originally, everybody was like, I don't know the information I need to go collect, so I'm going to ask a lot
Sure.
of questions. And
Yeah.
then we've gotten better at that, and they're like asking suppliers to tell me their capabilities. And then as we've gotten that, we realized that suppliers may say anything. So it's a no, I need that to be trusted. I need that to be vetted.
Mhm.
And that's where like a relish steps in. I mean, so you see them go not just scraping things from websites, it really does become they're pulling in these trusted sources, and you get another level of confidence that what you're getting is real, not just the marketing glitz and glamour that a supplier may be wanting to tell you. I mean, they will go validate banking information, they will go validate certifications, and you know that you have a lot more confidence that the data came from them versus just a supplier, probably somebody coming from a marketing or sales just saying what it is.
Yeah. And I think what that also means too, with that confidence, I'm glad you used that word because when you originally used trust, it made me automatically think about confidence. But also too, what that means is you can utilize your procurement teams that much more strategically because you don't have to have one person on that particular supplier that knows everything about the supplier,
Mhm.
right? You're having a one source of truth where everybody can log into, go and look at that supplier, look at the validations, and have the confidence to move forward in whatever they're looking to do with that supplier. So, how do we get there? How should we be measuring and validating our supplier data? And what are the different techniques or strategies that we can use to do it? Jeremy, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to understand is how long your processes are taking, right? I mean, you first have to understand where these problems are lying within the overall process. And
Mhm.
so measuring that information in will be key. And so that's one of the reasons why Relish is in existence is companies realize that this validation process is taking way too long.
So
And
long.
so yeah, right. We had a study where the company was spending like 5 hours doing these validations
Wow.
across for a given supplier, and we were able to do that in minutes. So I think the measurement is key because then you're able to kind of break down where do I need to go and solve these issues. And so that is where what I think you'll start to see, and you're seeing in the market now, where you can see this measurement of data of supplier management processes, and you're now going and targeting specific things rather than just throwing something on the wall to see if it's working.
Right.
And that's where we can do so much more in this particular area. And I know SAP's reporting solution allows us to do these things, right? So they have the technology out there that can do this today.
Well, and I think about procurement teams, right? I think about, just even a couple of years ago when we were having some issues getting raw materials for certain things, or maybe even finished products. And there was a time where procurement teams were really tasked with onboarding new suppliers. And they were needing to onboard those suppliers sooner rather than later because you had lines that were down, you had people that couldn't work, you had capital on the table every single day, potentially costing into the hundred thousands or the millions on a day-to-day basis, depending on what company that was. And that was a real struggle if they didn't have a platform like yours sort of in place to be able to do that within minutes. I mean, think about it. you've been tasked with finding a new supplier. You know that that's going to take you over 5 hours to do that. And you're sitting there at maybe, I don't know, noon. Everybody's out, leaves the office by 5, and you're like, I can't do this today. This is now going to bleed in tomorrow, and it's going to cost the company how much money. And
Yeah.
so I just sort of think about that as a scenario.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
take that as a competitive differentiator too. I mean, we looked at scenarios where there's like flooding in Thailand or something, and
Yeah.
the ability for a customer to react faster and go pick up things because there's an outage there from the spot market kind of, and to buy things up. I mean, that speed becomes a competitive differentiator, and then
Mhm.
when your competitors can't react that fast, they take the 5 or 6 hours and you've already bought up the supply, right? I mean,
Ah,
I mean, it's really, really powerful. So I really like how you said that.
well, yeah, and think about the disruption, right? We're seeing disruption all across supply chain. If you can take this one disruption off the table, I mean that's game changer. Right. And
Mhm.
so, Jeremy, I want to talk to you about the role that that technology sort of plays in all of this, right? Because we want to be using technology to automate supplier data validation process as much as possible. I've just sort of mentioned a bit of a scenario on how that can help. And you mentioned that it's taken it from 5 hours down to just minutes. What are some of the other benefits that that technology can play a role in those kinds of scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, the first is you're going to source of truth for data, right? So today you'd have to go off and manually call a bank or manually
Mm,
go to some site to go verify this information. We're going to the source of truth for that information and getting it in real time. So that's, I think, a key thing that you need. The second area that I think where we have this benefit, as I talked before, is this seamless integration where you don't need to know like where you're integrating this into. And so let me rephrase that instead of not knowing where you're integrating into, we're integrating into SAP. And so that you can do that validation behind the scenes and get that information as part of your approval flows, and now those your users can make real-time decisions as you get that information. And
mhm.
so then they're able to act upon that and decide, well, is this supplier on the sanction list? Or is this the actual name of the supplier or not? And make this decision and continue on that process flow.
Well, and I think that brings collaboration into sort of the conversation because then that flows into the different departments, right? You bring in the supply chain department that has the logistics component, right? When you source a new supplier, you need to know that they can ship from there and what that's going to cost and what that looks like and all that kind of stuff. And so if you take those 5 hours, you validate within minutes, they know they can buy the product from that. They bring in logistics. Logistics says, well, okay, there might be a free trade agreement in place that we could take advantage of. Oh, we can ship air and ocean freight from this place and we can get it on the next vessel by this time, this date, and going back to what Matt said, like there's your competitive advantage right there. And you're bringing everybody together within, maybe half an hour to an hour rather than 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 7 days. I mean, that is huge. But the challenge in all of that, though, is that sometimes, we're putting the cart before the horse because the process really is so complex. I just gave an example of how you need to be collaborating with other departments, and everybody is really keen to sort of integrate new technologies, but we're not always entirely sure which way we should be looking at that problem. So, Matt, talk to us about how process drives the technology, or maybe the technology drives the process. Like, what needs to be in place first?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are layers of what you need. I mean, fundamentally, we put supplier information into a system so that we can go pay them and report our taxes. And then if you keep maturing that to where you want to treat suppliers based on how you're going to interact with them, I think that there's a lot of efficiency there. And you've been talking about supply chain,
Yeah.
but I don't want to do all of this heavy lifting in a manufacturing process if I'm paying a florist. I don't want to. And so when we talk about how technology can really optimize that knowledge of region, industry, commodity, business unit, because the way that you work with public sector and government agencies is very different than consumer, because of regulations and whatnot. That we can really start to say, I know who this supplier is. I know what we're going to do with that supplier. I'm going to collect the right data at the right time to make the best decisions, no more, no less, so that I can be as efficient as possible. Because I just coming out of the Olympics sort of time frame, right? I mean, these aren't relay races where you're handing the baton. It's you send something over to accounts payable to finish, or supply chain, or these.
Mm-hmm.
So as much as the technology can optimize and build trust so that we can do things systematically,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes much, much more efficient, as Jeremy said, because I now trust the source. And then this data is plugged into those decision support models. And we call it supplier aware decision making, risk aware decision making. But it's having that knowledge of certification, qualification levels, due diligence to do all the things that you were talking about, dual sourcing and whatnot of these suppliers, recognizing who might be available, not wasting time finding out 3 weeks into an RFP that the supplier wouldn't be eligible because we've already done the due diligence up front. All of those valuable things the technology is really helping us do. So we want to get that set up in that process of understanding what the outcomes are, so that we can figure it to make those decisions that we need, and so that all the other processes run just as fast.
Well, and I also think to use the technology to its fullest potential, you do really need to understand the process, what each person is doing within your teams,
Mhm.
what the procurement team is doing as a whole, and then how does that bleed into the other departments and the information that they need to know? Because then also the technology partner, like you, Jeremy, or even you, Matt, at SAP or Relish, you can also help them with the technology to help solve for those. If they don't know that, that's a tough conversation, right?
It is, and I think as you get into those things, why are workflows in place? It's because I don't maybe trust someone else to make that right decision, or I may
Okay,
not think
fair.
that they've got all of the right knowledge to make the most informed decision in those workflows. So you start to see, as you get to these trusted sources, to say, if as a human being I went to you and said, look, if I validated against this trusted source, this trusted source, this trusted source, and it met this criteria, I'm okay to approve it. Do you trust that? And people are going to say yes. So then you say,
Mhm.
okay, if I did that systematically, do you need to be in the approval flow because we're doing these things? And so we can start not just automating the approval flow, but actually reducing the steps, because we know systematically what we've already been able to do.
That's interesting. And I talk about technology a lot and how it translates into the communication when we're talking to the C-suite. And
Mhm.
so you've just validated that between departments, because not only do we have to communicate it up in how we're getting ROI and, how it's helping us with workflows, et cetera, we have to communicate it out so that everybody else also trusts and have confidence in what we're doing as a department that bleeds into what they
Yeah.
do on a day-to-day basis as well.
Yeah, I mean, protecting the brand. I mean, there's all
Yeah.
sorts of other aspects of this that I mean, by validating that we're not working with somebody with a human rights, sort of issue, or whatever that is. I mean, that changes everything. So, and we can really automate knowledge of those things.
So talk to us about that, because I want to take a look at mitigating risk as part of, I mean, it's really a key part of this validation process, right? And I think in procurement we often talk about it being supplier risk, but it can almost feel like a bit of a one-sided conversation. We're talking about suppliers, we're perhaps even demanding things of them, but they could be missing from the discussion that we're having about suppliers and supplier risk. So, how does
Mhm.
technology sort of help suppliers be participants without, drawing everything out, having too many meetings, which nobody has time for, right? How do we help them be participants in the risk management process instead of just being subjected to it, Matt?
Yeah, I think just there's a lot of knowledge that we can get from suppliers that we can then take and leverage to go do that. We want suppliers to be aware, and we don't. we don't want to treat them as they're bad actors trying to get away with things that we're trying to uncover. We want to share that knowledge and help make them better. So if there's certain standards that we're going to have to hold them to, let's make sure that we can communicate those standards, and they can be better, and it helps them. They could be more competitive, and it could open up new opportunities with other customers for them. So we definitely want to do that. But I think, as I look at new capabilities now, looking at things like, if I understand the location of the site that I'm going to be leveraging. I mean, I can apply data to look for deforestation. I can look
Mhm.
at carbon footprint. You can look at all sorts of other things that we can ask of that supplier to do. But we can also share and collaborate with them on what are our standards around human rights, or what are our standards around IT security, and making sure that we continue to make that available. We can, through that certification, it's not just a fail, it's you need to get to the standard before we're able to work with you, so that they can
Hmm.
up their game and stay at that level too. So it does become much more of a transparent conversation on expectations, and then that should help. And what we do with, like, the SAP Business Network is, by getting folks to a certain standard or having that information, they open themselves up to discovery then for other customers to go find them. And there's a sort of, the what is it, the rising tide raises all ships, however that
Mhm.
goes, right? That we, every customer is going to benefit from that supplier doing, hitting that certification level, or hitting that expected standard.
Yeah, that's really interesting because that could result in even new revenue streams for that particular supplier, which then, helps them help you. I mean, that
That's right.
feedback we haven't really been able to provide to suppliers in the past. It's almost been like, we need this information from you because we need to know where you stand. Go out and get it and spend all this time, energy, and money
Yeah.
doing that. And we may or may not work with you.
Or if you think about the no invoice, no pay, they may have already said, we're collecting this information, but we've already engaged them or using them. And by the time they get done with the supplier information so that we can pay them, we realize, like, uh-oh.
Right.
So I do think that there's much more of an expectation that we're able to do things faster. Relish talking about that, down to minutes, so that we can do things in the right order, so that we can drive
Mm.
the right behaviors. Because we have leverage at the beginning, right? We don't have leverage after they've done the work.
Well, and the conversation is just different at that point, right? They're also not I mean, wasting is the wrong word, but putting in all of that time, energy, and effort for then you to come back and say, "Hey, we need you to get to this level before we can work with you." Or like you said around payments, we didn't get enough information. It's going to be another 60 to 90 days that we can pay you, and then maybe you can't even get the product at that point, depending
Right.
on,
Right.
how you negotiated that contract. I mean, that just opens it up and shows the web of disruption that can take place when you're not on top of it, the way that we're talking about some of these risks. Now, we touched on AI in the last show, but I want to expand on it with you today because we really are on an AI journey. I mean, I've had a lot of people come on this show and say, we've been talking about AI for 10 years. How is AI going to transform the processes we've talked about? Like, what is the future of supplier data validation, risk mitigation? What's that going to look like? And maybe as an industry, what's your perspective on where we are on that journey? Jeremy, I'm going to bring you back into the conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we've been looking at AI, as you said, for a long time now, and I think one of the biggest problems is the term is almost overused. It kind of means everything, right? And everyone now, especially if you talk to, say, my wife or somebody out there, is like, you talk about AI and they think Siri, they think Chat GPT.
Mhm.
So their perception of AI now is just this little microcosm of how they're experiencing it.
Right.
And so I think what's important to note is, as you said, it's been around for a long time and it's already part of all the technologies that you're using, whether you know it or not. It's just happening behind the
Scary.
scenes. And people don't necessarily get that just because they're interacting with some assistant and they think that's AI. But that said, I think generative AI, and as specifically as you look at some of the new technologies that came out over the last 2 years, that everyone's so excited about, I think that they're going to have a profound impact on what we're doing. And a lot of people don't necessarily see it because they think of me just asking questions and generating a poem or a picture. But what's behind the scenes in what you're doing inside of a business is you're now able to take a large set of data and synthesize that using AI to synthesize that much quicker than ever before. And just as equally as important, and people don't realize this because they don't sit on the engineering side,
Mhm.
but we're able to do this a lot faster. Like the tools that we can use now to do things allow us to accelerate the development faster. So
Mhm.
what you're going to see over the next 5 years, not only will we improve how fast we're innovating, but it's going to be coming at even a much quicker pace. We're just at the very tip of this, right? We're only like 2 years in since ChatGPT went crazy. And so companies are now just starting to incorporate that technology to do things such as like read information off of a supplier website, right? And
Mhm.
summarize that information for me so that the supplier doesn't have to rekey in their data,
Right.
right? Or a certificate coming in or a W-8, W-9 coming in. With this image, reading, you can read images and understand images now with AI. They're going to be able to just do that for you. You don't need to build a program now to go read this file. The AI is just going to be able to understand it by looking at it and do that. So I think what we're going to really see is this supplier automation trend really continuing over the next 5 years so that everything becomes faster and faster over time.
Well, and if that's the case, right, the rate of change, the rate of innovation is just going to increase. And I feel like that sort of comment overwhelms a lot of professionals and leaders. But at the same time, if you get ahead of it or understand it, now you get the right technologies in place to help utilize those tools. I think you'll be well ahead of the game. And I think that overwhelm will hopefully diminish for a lot of professionals and leaders. So, how are SAP and Relish automating supplier data validation? What can we learn from your approach? What solutions are you using? How are you using them? How are you leveraging that technology? Matt, I'm going to start with you and then we're going to go to Jeremy.
Yeah, so I think as we look at the technologies that we're trying to think about from an onboarding perspective or a lifecycle processes or performance management, I mean, the ability, as Jeremy was describing, to go out and find information, pull it in from trusted sources so that we don't have to go do that research ourselves. You know, Sarah, I really like what you said earlier about I can do like that procurement team can cover each individual can cover more suppliers. I mean, that idea is really important. The other thing that we think about there that I didn't want to miss was that a lot of this capability, like for my strategic suppliers, I onboarded them like a decade ago. I mean, they don't
Right.
change. So this ability to keep that also current, I never
Yeah.
had that capability before, unless they were somebody that was so big that I was doing quarterly business reviews. I mean, there's just too many of them to do that. But now with that technology, being able to kind of keep that up to date and keep versions of that to show trend lines, that is really powerful. And I know our customers are using like Relish to kind of keep that data up to date and run with it. I think that's really important. And I think where we're headed with that is to kind of build on what Jeremy said, and even the last question too, is how do we start to do a better job of taking an individual supplier, an individual process that we've been talking a lot about, and think about them in context of related
Mhm.
suppliers in that commodity industry region, business unit, whatever they are, and start to show that do we see performance trends dropping? Like this supplier's okay, but now when we look at them, they're ninth out of 11, that kind of idea. So does that help me make better decisions? And we're going to start seeing a lot more context and coaching, that coach in your ear to say, are you sure you want to do that? Because the last 5 times, this has happened, or this gets stuck in the approval process because of, or we've got other suppliers that already do this. some that are diverse, in line with your corporate strategy. And it will take the contract process will take, X amount of time to go get done,
Right.
but you can start with these other suppliers now. I mean, I think that we're going to get a lot more sort of that coach in your ear that's going to help you go faster and be better with this.
Well, suggested suppliers, I mean, just think about how that's going to change the world for procurement. I mean, that's that alone, right? Or even an alert, right? This
Yeah.
supplier, we haven't looked into this supplier in a long time. We really need to get up to date. We need them to be current. Maybe it alerts that procurement team, but maybe it alerts the supplier to say, it's now time to update, what you have in place with this particular client, right? Before the client even knows. I mean, there is so much potential. There's so much
Oh,
opportunity
yeah.
here.
I love that on the supplier side. Sorry to get all geeked out
No,
about
all
this
good.
stuff, but I think on the supplier side to say, I mean, I have observed suppliers get a little bit relaxed and lazy.
Complacent.
They've been in the
Mhm.
relationship a long time. That if there was sort of a customer optimization thought process as well, as we think about this, like, hey, this customer's been around for a while. How do we start to deal with that? Because on the procurement side, we're watching that. We don't see the discounts we were getting in the beginning. We don't get see the ideation, the collaboration that we were seeing. We don't. They feel like they've sort of they're guaranteed our business at this point. So we want to kind of switch things up. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot more of that recommended coaching to say to get to these savings, you're going to have to go switch. And what we've observed or what the industry has observed, is
Mhm.
an auction is the best idea or an RFP is the best idea at this frequency. And we can, as you said already, not waste time with suppliers that aren't going to win. Let's go spend time with the vetted suppliers because we have a higher confidence level that they have those capabilities so that the amount of single sourcing or sole sourcing, I mean, we can really reduce that risk based on this better knowledge.
Yeah, well, and the feedback is critical, right? You might not be able to work with them now, but they can be back on the radar in the future if they take your feedback and they implement it. That's what you want to
Absolutely.
know
Yep.
anyways, because you want to know that they're going to go and do the work to gain your business. I
Right.
think I've just come up with a feature or function if it's not a part of your platforms yet.
We'll implement it next week. We're starting on it.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Jeremy, what do you think about what Matt said? And talk to us about the solution of how you guys are working together.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, I'll start with how we're working together because I think it's important. And this integration into these systems is like this critical piece that I can't stress enough because if you think about it, think about how many cloud providers have, sprung up over the last 10, 15 years. And you are now getting more and more systems that you need to integrate to.
Hmm.
And that challenge is making it very, now you have all this information. So how do you do all these integrations? And you said this on your last one of the last podcast with Relish and SAP, you talked about the telephone switchboard operator, and that's exactly kind of how I think about it, right? It's like you're connecting SAP to all these other systems, and Relish is kind of the switchboard operator in this case, right? We're connecting you to all those different data providers and bringing that information in. And so now you don't have to go to each different company. You don't have to go to each different provider separately. Build that integration. Find IT resources that are going to go help you build that integration and go do it, right? Relish is just one place that you can go to integrate and it just works. That's the beauty of the solution. It ties directly into SLP, the SLP solution, and it's real easy for the business to get value quickly.
Absolutely. All right. Well, it's time for our last question. I kind of want to get a little bit into the future. So, what can we expect from the rest of 2024 and into 2025? What's coming up for Relish? What's coming up for SAP? What do you think's coming up for the industry? Matt, I'm going to start with you first, then we'll go to Jeremy.
Yeah, I think that it is an exciting time, as Jeremy was saying. I mean, the ability for the technology to automate the speed of development. So I
Mhm.
think that we're going to see a lot more capabilities delivered faster than we've been able to do in the past. I just sort of I had a product manager kind of talking to me about how they were taking code and leveraging AI to go automate. Like it was just like uh, I remember hand typing in HTML. Back a long time ago. I'm that old, so I'm amazed by that. So I think that we're going to see innovation go faster, which I'm excited about because there's been some of the big things we had to get through before we could really respond to very specific customer requests. So when I look at AI being able to kind of drive and understand a customer requirement, a capability, that we can go speed up the process for delivering that component. I mean, we're really going to see that take off. We're going to see some things later in 2024, but definitely 2025. It's going to go really fast from a technology perspective.
Bef-
And there's Go
Sorry,
ahead.
I just wanted to jump in there because one question that came to mind while you were saying all of that was also if people aren't, or procurement teams or leaders aren't focused on supplier data validation today, what do you foresee for them in the next 6 to 12 months if that's not a focus and it should be?
Yeah, well, and it's a little scary because I think that it's harder to go collect the data if you're trying to if the regulations have already driven you to go do that. So
Mm,
because you're going to have to go, as we think about our suppliers, we think about the ones who are strategic for us, who are critical to our operations, and we want to go work with them. But there's so much in our supply chain that we're going to need to dig through. So,
mhm,
for a procurement professional, I would start to think about where are you operating in the world? What industries are you in? Do you feel confident that you're complying with those regulations?
mm,
And start to understand who your supply base is, such that we can you can start to apply this methodology to it so that we can go through that. And because some of these exercises, I mean, as we talk about the data or do the data collection, if the data is available, it's automatically automated. But if you have a certain standard, a new certificate level that you must a suppliers to go through to be there, to be in compliance with the German supply chain law or the DORA Act or the US regulation. I mean, if you had to move a factory out of a region to another location, that's not a small effort. So I think there's a lot of awareness that you need to have about where your suppliers are, where they're operating, what they're doing for you, and then you can accelerate then what actions need to be taken.
Well, and I think also the big question is how long is it taking you and your team or your team to validate a supplier, right? I
Oh,
think that's
yeah,
probably the first question anybody should be asking if they're not doing it already.
Yeah, and just to go on that topic, which is, I think a lot of these companies are doing the validation. To your point, sir, it just takes a long time, right? So it's
Right.
not like they're not doing it. It's they either don't know that they're supposed to be doing it, right? And they need to, as Matt was saying, or they're doing it and it's taking a long time.
They don't
yeah,
know there's a better way.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
And
But
I
yeah,
remember being a corporate, working on third party risk at a corporate level, board level, right? And one of the scariest things was the time to switch. So if a manufacturing process and I had to go do the due diligence, and that's even worse in like the medical device field or some of these other where there's so much validation needs to happen, we can automate a chunk of it. You can't automate everything, but you can automate such a big chunk on it. So, Sarah, to the earlier point, that people aren't wasting time on the low value things. I mean, they can spend more time on the things that require boots on the ground or something else to do that
Yeah.
validation. But
Yeah.
but you can just cut out so much of the waste
Mhm.
through this automation.
Yeah. So before we go, Jeremy, what do you think the future holds? You didn't really get to answer that question.
yeah, no, I mean that's what my whole job is around is laying out the future. So no, I'm super excited to talk about it because I think increasing the number of connections for Relish is where a lot of our focus is, and in connecting to all these different data providers and giving customers the choice to integrate rather than having to not be able to integrate. So I think that's one area specifically where Relish is going. I think the other area that you're going to see is, well, what do you do next? Like, so you've done this validation. I've automated that process for you. I've given you those results, but now what? Like, I told you that this supplier may be on the sanctions list. So now how do I automate that next step? And so that I don't have to do that. So it's like I show you, I literally bring you the URL to the website, and then I allow you to ask questions like, well, what other information do you need to know to confirm or deny this piece of information that I
Mhm.
gave you? So I think that that's where you'll start to see this go, especially as it relates to generative AI, is what do I want to do next to help automate that process and get through that validation process quicker and faster.
Absolutely. Well, navigating the global market and the associated risk of fraud requires smart solutions for supplier data validation. Because supplier data validation isn't just an efficiency problem, it's about building robust defenses in a continuously evolving risk landscape. But fear not, because Relish is the smart solution you're looking for. Their Data Assure software excels in seamlessly verifying supplier details, ensuring accuracy and trust in your local and global vendors, as well as mitigating fraud risk across the spend management process. Now, did you have a guess at today's big question? Well, at the top of the show, I asked you today's guest helps customers to automate, validate, and secure supplier data, helping to avoid fraud or cyber attacks. But according to the recent report, what percentage of organizations had two or more identity related breaches in the past year? Well, it's a huge 93%. Now, that's a really scary statistic. So, you need to make sure you're equipped with the tools you need to secure your data integrity and make sure you're not spending time on things that just don't need to take that much time anymore. If you want to find out more, you can check them out at relishiq.com. If you'd like to hear more from us at Let's Talk Supply Chain, we have plenty more content for you featuring the best and brightest in the industry. Head over to letstalksupplychain.com to check out the latest. And remember to come back next week. I'm going to be joined by Amit from Narvar, an innovative end-to-end post-purchase platform. And you're not going to want to miss that one. So make sure that you come back. Now, Jeremy and Matt, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on the episode today and sharing such great insights. I know it's going to make a difference in a lot of supply chain professionals' lives. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank
Yeah,
you so
thanks. A
much
lot
for
of
having
fun.
me.